exec and board buy-in for tech spend, and we have a very special guest with us today, Adelina Chalmers.
Hello.
Okay. Now, I'm your co-host, Daniel Walters, former CTO and CIO of Seek Asia, and currently working as a CTO coach and consultant. And with me is my co-host, Netta.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Noah Cantor. I'm a tech leadership coach. Got more than 20 years experience in and around technology, ranging from startups to large enterprises across all aspects of tech, from the service desk to the back end, from DevOps to leadership. I work with people all over the world as coach, a fractional CTO, and a consultant. And as Daniel said, our special guest today is founder of the Geek Whisperer, Adelina Chalmers. Welcome, Adelina.
Thank you, Noah. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Daniel, as well.
Looks like Daniel's freezing over there, so we'll get started.
I'm getting a slight delay here, which...
And so we'll go through some housekeeping. So as usual, we will answer any questions as we go. A recording will be hosted on LinkedIn and will be available for viewing afterwards. And our next guest will be Tiani Jones for the 6th episode of CTO Life Line on August 29th at 11:30 New Zealand, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time and 4:30 p.m. Pacific. But we'll talk just a little bit more about that at the end of the show. I don't want to distract it from right now. So today we are going to talk about getting exec board buy-in for tech spend. And for me, this is a fascinating topic. So I've had my share of investment conversations with the executive, but I've rarely had to make my case myself to a board with non-executive members. It hasn't usually come to that. So I'm really curious about how the experience is similar and how it's different.
So, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, I had some technical difficulties just right at the start here. I am hoping that I'm back and on the screen. I can now see and hear you both, which is terrific. So Adelina, before we dig into that question, so you're the founder of the Geek Whisperer Associates. Maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You've been in this sort of coaching game and consulting game since 2011, is that right?
Yes, I started my business in 2011, the last time I was made redundant. And in the last 13 years, I've seen a vast variety of cases between CTOs in small businesses and CTOs in huge corporations. So it's been quite an interesting journey.
Was that deliberate, that you were looking for, either to be in those experiences of small and larger businesses, or was that sort of just circumstance?
It was, I suppose I'm just very lucky because I'm very good at networking. I essentially got myself in lots of different pockets of the CTO market, as it were. So from startups where I was part of the Cambridge University launching arm of businesses where I would help them pitch for investment, all the way up to corporations that were having major shifts. And I was helping CTOs in those kind of transition moments or difficulties with the board when a new board came in. But it was just because I just knew many people that, and also, it's quite a niche area. I mean, you think about it, to say, I specialize in helping engineering leaders with issues. Once, especially in a place like the UK, I mean, it's not America. Do you know what I mean? It's quite, then people hear about you and they contact you. I mean, now I'm everywhere. But initially, UK, and it's just you have that specialism, just people come to you, and a lot of people liked the brand.
Yeah,
So that really resonated.
it's a cool brand. I like it.
I didn't come up with it. In fact, I can tell
Yeah.
you how I came up with it, because I didn't come up with it. Some people pay 50,000. I remember someone telling me he paid £50,000 for rebranding, and I thought I didn't pay even a coffee. Basically, I was at a session basically, and I was doing initially pitching for investment for everybody, not just for CTOs. And someone, so there's this guy kind of hovering over there, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to. We should include him in the conversation." They said, "Oh, don't bother. He never talks to anybody." And I thought, "Oh, that's a challenge." So I said, "Hi, my name's Adelina," and I started talking to him for an hour, and everybody was staring at me. How is she doing this? Because this guy never talks to anybody. So then, one of the other people looked at me and said, "Oh my God, you're like a geek whisperer," and I just went, "This is it." So that was when but I didn't take it on for a few years because I was worried people would be offended by it. Because I had a few executives saying to me, "This is offensive. I would never work with you if you have this name." And for several years, I didn't do it. And then I realized that probably some of the execs will feel like that I wouldn't want to work with them anyway. So it's kind of all right.
It's a self-selection mechanism.
Brilliant. Yes. Either people love it or hate it.
Yeah.
And the people hate it, there's nothing I can do about it. Do you know what I mean? If they see the value in what I do, great. If not, if they hung up on a name, there's nothing I can do.
You mentioned it's sort of quite a niche area, and I agree with you, particularly in 2011, it was absolutely a niche area. But this trend of technology filtering into every aspect of most organizations has sort of made it, I think, a less niche area. But for right now, there's still... there's a mismatch between people in need and people available to help. So yeah, I just find it a very interesting area.
There's a need for a lot more CTOs than there used to be. Because the shift, right, from towards every company having to have some kind of investment in technology just in order to survive and thrive. Whereas, as you say, that didn't used to be the case. So that's a relatively recent change.
And I think that's partly the reason why we have so many inexperienced CTOs as well. Because they've never been there. They've never been at that level. They were so used to being given, how can I say it, being given things to do rather than them deciding and having a vision of what should be done.
That's probably part of it.
Well, let's get into... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Noah.
I was going to say there's also there's a standard scaling problem, right? So even if every CTO mentored another 5 CTOs, the rate of growth of the industry is actually significantly higher than anything we could keep up with. And you'd have to assume that those...
Well, we briefly lost Noah. I got the absolute gist of his point. What? Noah, you're back. I think all of us are. But you got your point across. So. I might. It was brilliant timing. I might take us into the topic, and I thought first we maybe map the territory, and so. We're talking about investments, and it's similar to a topic we've covered in a previous episode, but we were talking more generally about teams and peers, and now we're talking about CTOs, and in particular their ability to influence their executive peers and also boards. And as Noah highlighted earlier, that he's got some questions around, what is different when dealing with your executive leadership teams versus boards. So we'll absolutely dig into that. But first, to map the territory, what sorts of investments do CTOs usually need executive peer or board support with? And so, Adelina, I'll have the question to you first, and then Noah, I'm also keen as to what your experience has been.
So the sort of investments CTOs usually need peer or board support with are, well, when there's usually some change, but that's kind of, I like to dig into the differences between that, into the various types of change, right? Because, for example, it's really important to be in constant contact with your peers. So when you're proposing things, they're not a surprise to them. They kind of see it coming before you even said it, because you're so in tune with each other. So the kind of investments that CTOs usually need peer support are quite different than the sort of investments they need board support with. And I mean, I know we can go into that a bit later, but I will say that it's usually when they also, for example, need to do a course correction because they've realized actually some of these things are not our predictions from 2 years ago are not actually accurate as the market has moved on. And it depends also on the size of company, to be honest, as well, because in big corporations they have vastly different challenges than in smaller companies. I will let you ask me more detailed questions and also see what Noah would like to say, but because I don't want to take over the.
I think it's a good point that size matters, and it's a good point that that replanning actually has an impact. What's been, I think, interesting for me is working sometimes in organizations that don't plan that far in advance at all, and how that then can impact the necessity to actually get your peers involved on a much more regular basis. And sometimes that depends on trust, and sometimes it depends on communication, and they're all kind of interconnected. But generally, the less aware of what's going on your peers are, the more likely they are to be nervous when you have to do something that they didn't expect. Mm-hmm. And so that tends to be the time when, instead of just being able to go and do the thing that needs to be done, you need to get them involved and make sure that they clearly understand what's happening. And that, as you said, it does happen at all sizes, but it happens differently at different sizes.
Completely. Daniel, was there something you want to add, or can I comment on what Noah said?
Yeah. So my experiences, particularly with executive leadership versus board, sometimes it's been a governance issue, as in certain sizes of investments. So it might be allowed for 2 executives to partner up and co-sign on an investment, and they're over a certain size, then it might need to be board approval. So they're it's often linked to like the delegation of authority. And this is of course talking about sort of mid-sized and larger companies. So yeah, that is where it comes in. And so context, as we've concluded many times in this live stream, context matters on the decision making, and so we can provide some practical advice and tips on this, but the audience should definitely take it in tune with, or alongside their actual context of what what their situation is. Now we have a comment from the audience, so I might just put that up on screen. So Mark Batty says, yes, many are elevated from roles where they focus on how to build something into CTO roles without any training or experience in thinking terms of what to build and why, and have no idea where to begin. So I think that observation from Mark is exactly why I've taken the career path I have, and I imagine similar for you, Adelina. Does that resonate?
I mean, this is extremely common, absolutely. And I think it's actually the source of probably most of the challenges that I've seen CTOs have in smaller businesses, and not in the bigger businesses. Although some CTOs in the bigger businesses, when they become really big, have similar issues, but much more political. But yeah, how about you, John?
Yeah, it's that transition from kind of manager of people to manager of managers to understanding the direction of the company and how to think about technology and how it can actually help the company get there. And so there's this distinction between a lot of the ways we talk about new CTOs being still connected to the work they did as individual contributors and still seeing their role as being technical, even if they're not technical anymore and they kind of know they're not technical, they still kind of judge themselves on their technical capabilities and how aware they are of what's going on in that arena. And then, but the CTO role is very much a social role, a peer role, like a connective role. It's a bridge rather than just a downward focus. And that, I think, gives a lot of new CTOs a lot of struggle, a lot of trouble, kind of figuring out that difference and figuring out how to make the transition. And some of them don't ever make it.
This was actually the case, the cases that I was usually pulled into initially when in my CTO work. This is why I've seen the worst case scenarios, and I've seen how many of them actually have, if you look at their LinkedIn experience, if they actually put their real job title they had at the time, I've come across at least 30 CTOs that have 1 or 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 5 if they're lucky, years experience as CTO, sometimes even 10 years. And this is why I wrote a post like that about CTOs who have 5-10 years experience doesn't mean that they actually are an experienced CTO, because the whole time they were actually an engineering lead, at best a director of engineering level, but never a chief technology officer, strategic, business oriented, goal oriented vision, etc.
So Dan North said something about that in a post the other day where he talked about that's the difference really between having 10 years experience and having 10 one-year experiences.
And yeah, that's pretty much what, yeah. And I think when you interview a CTO, you really need to zero in on that and figure out which one is it.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Well, we have another comment from the audience. So James Downer says, I remember a senior stakeholder of mine in a moment of alarming frankness when I was trying to lobby for funding for a replatforming project with no short-term revenue benefit, saying to me, look, James, the group is motivated by fear of greed. I ended up focusing on the risk implications, not the funding of the projects, and successfully, thankfully. Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I'm sure we've all seen something similar in our career experience.
Absolutely. And coming back,
we've
sorry, Adelina was saying something. I think we might have a slight delay. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, James, for the comment. Absolutely spot on. I have seen this many times, and it's often good to identify, when you were saying, Noah, about the difference between presenting to the board and presenting to the exec about getting some funding for a product redesign or whatever else. And the key with the board, you always have to see it's either risk they care about more than profit, or profit above risk. Sometimes some of them are so reckless they don't even understand the risk, and it's good to make the risk clear and the implications of that risk. But creating a relationship with the board and understanding what the board cares about, what flavor this board is actually really important in these crucial moments.
Okay, so is that part of why some CTOs struggle?
Well,
Is that
I do have a
missing that distinction between them?
Sorry, could you mind repeating? I didn't quite hear the whole question.
I was just asking if that's some of what goes into why some CTOs struggle to actually get the board buy-in, is that they don't understand what's motivating their board.
100%. And so even experienced CTOs, I've worked with several CTOs who've been CTOs for 15 years, very experienced commercially, very well aligned, with the business goals. And this is the reason why they were doing redesigns or whatever else. And they still couldn't get the decision over the line with the board. And it was because they hadn't figured out that the board cared about risk, because all of the questions the board were asking were about risk. And that's the other thing. Just pay attention. Even if you don't know how to answer those questions, just pay attention to the questions they're asking you in the moment, and you'll see the flavor of the board they are.
That's a fair point. And if you fail to get that investment the first time around, can you go back later and do it and try again? Like what happens when you don't get that first yes?
Oh, I mean, I worked with 4 different CTOs who took them nearly 9 months before and some of them a year before they came to me and said, I can't get this over the line. What's going on? I know what I'm doing. I'm really experienced at this. What's happening here? And then I showed them that they were just making the completely wrong pitch for this type of board. And that was it, really. And they still got the yes at the end. After the next time they went to the board meeting, they did get the yes. In fact, one of the case studies that I describe in a video that I put on LinkedIn, called "How to Get an Engineering Spend from the Board," approval for engineering spend from the board, describes this in detail, actually. How this sort of thing can happen, how you can still get the yes if it's still relevant to the business goals, of course.
And are there any kind of adverse effects from going back to the board repeatedly to have that conversation? Like what's their view and their experience?
I think that's a great question. I think the problem is that it's you start eroding confidence after a few meetings. And this is, I suppose, one of the advantages of having, a tech leadership coach, as you call yourself, or, what Daniel does, or what I do. I call myself an advisor, because I actually literally make specific suggestions of what to do. I don't coach people in that sense. Because, I say to them, the presentation is to change from A to B, or from from this version to the other version, sort of thing. And I literally say how it needs to change, sort of thing. But I would say that it's really important to not to do this early, because if you do it late, then you start eroding confidence, and it becomes harder and harder for them to trust that you know what you're doing. And people like you and I, we help these people accelerate their success rate and cut short the amount of time it takes them to get something right, rather than getting something wrong over and over and over again, whilst at the same time not realizing that damaging relationships and damaging their reputation.
And do you think there's something about kind of the way that most CTOs come up that kind of leaves that gap in their awareness? Or does this happen, in your opinion, and kind of to everybody who comes up on that path, and everybody has to figure this out?
That's such a great question. I mean, I think engineers in particular have a trait that works very well for engineering, but doesn't work very well in business. And that particular trait is the fact that they often, that's one of them, there's many others, but this is one of the key ones I've seen. They often like to figure stuff out for themselves. They go to GitHub, they go to Google, they try and figure out for themselves what the problem is, instead of talking to other people to get advice. How many engineers do you see going to other engineers going, I'm lost, how would you do it? I mean, they're even taught, the rubber duck thing, where you kind of go through it over and over again on your own. In business, that doesn't work as well, because if you keep doing that to a bunch of business people, they look at you and go, this guy clearly is lost, or this woman is clearly not sure what's going on. but she's not asking for help, or she's not asking the right questions, not asking for advice, not looking the right places. And there's a lot of strength in going out there, especially as a first-time CTO, to go to your C-suite or your board, and when you start the role or before you start the role, to say, I want an advisor from the beginning to avoid mistakes and accelerate my performance. I mean, how strong is that?
It's there's a real strength in admitting vulnerability that I think a lot of people fear will be mistaken for weakness. And so they hide it, and so they end up doing the thing that actually shows weakness rather than the thing that shows strength.
100%. And it is true in some companies, and I can think of a corporation off the top of my head right now, that kind of thing would be seen as weakness. But you have to, then you need to understand, why are you joining them? Because then you're gonna, but sometimes I would say 90% of the time they perceive it as a weakness when in fact other people around them don't. And that's the mistake. That's the problem.
There's a humility aspect. By the way, is my audio still delaying, or have I caught up now that I'm back in the studio?
I think you're caught up because you just jumped in at the right time as Adelina finished speaking. So let's go from here, and hopefully the problems are resolved.
Fantastic.
Sorry, humility, you're saying.
Yeah, so and I think that was true of my career path as well. There were times when I was offered some help, and it took me quite a while to say yes. And I think Adelina is spot on by saying that there's an instinctual, trying to solve it all yourself, and that's good. A lot of learning comes from making mistakes, but so sometimes it has a bigger consequence, and if you lose that trust, it takes a lot to build that back up again. And so sometimes better to ask for help when it's available.
I think there's also a kind of a once bitten, twice shy kind of feeling to it, because when I was coming up and I was still technical, I worked with, I wasn't a great first-time manager, so I wouldn't model what I'm about to tell you as the right behavior to take. But when I had junior people repeatedly ask me kind of similar questions, I'd get noticeably irritable with them. And the impact of that is so long lasting, in that they stop coming to you to get help, and then that becomes the ingrained habit. And it wasn't until one of my mentors came to me and he said, I'm teaching engineers to ask for help because the default position is not to. And so I work really hard in my role to get them to speak to me when they get stuck. And so what you're doing is actively undermining their growth. And so you should probably stop. And it took me a little bit longer than that conversation to figure out how to stop, but actually it was incredibly valuable that he pulled me aside and he told me that.
Can I actually make a quick comment on that? Because this is one of the most common problems I've seen CTOs have. And the expression that engineers, because I interview engineers, when a CTO comes to me and says they want to work with me, I also speak to their engineers and to their board and to their CEO to understand how they see them. And the engineer's expression usually is, he seems emotionally unstable when we ask him questions, and it's usually he, to be honest, he thinks I think he's an idiot, and I just genuinely don't understand what he's talking about, and I want to clarify to make sure I do the right things. And they basically said, I'm worried about asking questions going forward. And that's exactly it. And I would say, as a CTO, if you're caught in that situation, because it's easy to get frustrated, because actually either you feel attacked, when 9 out of 10 times is not the case. I mean, how many engineers would really attack their CTO? Let's be real here. If you feel attacked, actually spelling out and saying, folks, I notice myself, I'm feeling a bit anxious about this conversation right now, and I want to take some time to calm down so we can talk about it properly, because it's something I need to look at, and having that kind of level of honesty with your engineers. I mean, they'll be blown away, but also you're encouraging that level of self-awareness in them as well. So then when they feel like hiding stuff, they realize that actually you're much more comfortable and happy for them not hiding stuff from you if they tell you stuff early. And that's the other thing that I saw, especially in corporations. Engineers were terrified of talking about mistakes or worries that things are not going to be done on time early.
Yeah, and that kind of modeling vulnerability starts with the people who have the most power, because they're the
100%.
ones who have to show that it's okay in order for other people to feel comfortable doing it. And there are always outliers. There's always, you point out that one person who will always admit their mistakes, or that other person who will never admit them. But the vast majority of people will largely reflect the behaviors and the level of vulnerability that's shown by the people that they see as powerful or successful.
100%.
It's that common behavior of people asking questions and the leaders hearing them as statements, and that was when I witnessed that'd be a common area to sort of start working with them and saying, like, you know what, you actually need to make some space for these questions to come through. We do have questions and comments from the audience as well, so I'm going to put a few up on the screen because we've got 3 banked up.
Before we answer those things, just want to point out that it also goes the other way, right? The words that we say as leaders, as CTOs or head of engineering, whatever it is, they have an impact far beyond what we expect them to. So an off-the-cuff comment that we might make might send someone in a spiral for a week because they think they're being criticized, or it might completely shift the direction a product is taking because somebody thinks that we're demanding a massive change. And so there's this awareness that needs to happen, particularly when there are big power differentials between people that are communicating with each other. Like, we want to make it safe for people to actually speak their minds, but we also need to be aware of the impact our words have and how they can undermine that very safety that we're trying to create.
Absolutely. This is why I bang on about self-awareness so much.
So we'll put in a video at the end, I believe, the link.
There'll be a link to the video, but it's also on my LinkedIn profile in the featured section. Is the first thing that you see.
Yeah, and we'll share it at the end. And then Mark Batty also asks, what common metrics measures do you think boards are most interested in when assessing technology investments?
Do you want to answer that first?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. So it depends, Mark, and if you can comment again, it would be great to get some clarity with regards to the context, as you were saying earlier, of what kind of context can you think of, real context about assessing technology investments? Because I can interpret that in at least 2 ways. So, for example, if the CTO and the CEO are pitching for investment to investors before the investors have invested already, then it's a very different pitch than if they pitch whilst they pitch for budget. So not the additional investment, but budget from the current company. That's a very different investment. And then there's another one where you're asking them to reinvest. And that's, again, a different proposition. So I can go 3 different directions with this because the metrics are different. But if I were to look for the most common ones, let's say, that usually go across all 3 are customer acquisition numbers, customer retention, customer upsell, customer dropout. So if, for example, your redesign will stop the hemorrhage of customers that you have at the moment dropping out, the investors are well aware of that, then that will fly really nicely. However, if they're not aware there's any customer hemorrhage, they'll be going, why do we care about this? So, but usually it's about the customer and the profit margin. That's the bottom line. Risk as well. But if I had to line them up in kind of order, it would be profit margin and then risk. And then out of profit margin and risk, obviously, there's a million different options. But that's the simplest way I can explain it. But happy to go deeper if you give us some clarity with regards to the situation you were thinking about.
what I think is really interesting about that is that they're all customer metrics. They're not tech specific metrics. They're not
100%.
internal. They're not internal metrics. They're all about how does this create value for customers, or how does it kind of lead to a situation overall where the business wants to be rather than where tech wants to be.
100%. And it's actually DORA metrics. I think I wrote the post about this the other day. Talking about DORA metrics in the boardroom is literally the reason why I've been called in 3 different investment funds to talk to the CTO.
I did have a conversation just the other day where we were talking about one of the signs of competence of the CTO is that you can keep that level of specificity and engineering metrics out of the room and talk about the impact that it has. And you can talk about kind of the direction of the business, and you can do that translation rather than like bringing in all your technical measures, which a lot of, I think, former engineers try to do to demonstrate their competence.
And I think that you hit something there that's really, really deep. And now the point escapes me because I didn't want to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
But I think you were talking about. I think you were talking about the value. Is that right? Yeah, you're talking about the value. And this is the thing. Yes, you can't figure out what that value is by working in isolation. You need to be in constant contact and discussion with the other departments, with customer success, with product design, with any. You need to talk with marketing, with sales. How can you, as a CTO? Often CTOs, how can you find this out if you don't talk to the other people? One CTO said to me, no, my job is not to tell them about profit margins. That's sales or the CEO's job, nothing to do with me. And I'm going, but it's your department. and he was like, no, but I don't have those numbers. But you can ask for them. Just like back to that point I made earlier about the fact that, well, I don't have the numbers, therefore it's not my job. Instead of proactively figuring out the numbers by talking to the other departments.
I've spoken with
and more and more often.
I think we're on a delay
more and more
there,
often
Daniel.
technology. On a delay. Okay. More and more often, as we were talking about earlier, technology is a key dependency for a lot of different functions within the business, and so the influence that technology can have on those customer retention numbers, those customer acquisition numbers, is also in many organizations vastly increased. So I often talk to leaders about having a persistent model, like what is our theory on what actions influence what outcomes within the business. So that you can have conversations and identify what is the right level to engage at. Talk in terms of what is actually driving the business, rather than the technical details specific to just my department.
I was coaching not that long ago, probably 6-8 months ago, 2 CTOs, separate CTOs, who both showed up within close proximity to each other, actually, who showed up and talked to me about their concerns that their teams wouldn't respect them because they didn't have like a recent technical background and they didn't have that strong engineering background. And one of them had a product background and one of them had an infrastructure background, right? So these are people who have been in technology for years. And during our conversations, both of them talked about how connecting people was the thing that they were great at. And it didn't take long just to help them realize that that's an engineering superpower, right? The ability to listen to what your engineers are saying and then connect it with what the rest of the business is doing and vice versa, and go and talk to the sales team and build a team actually that communicates effectively and works together effectively. That is an incredibly rare skill. And it's hugely undervalued because of what we've been talking about this whole time about engineers valuing the engineering skills and not the connection skills.
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I had this very discussion actually with a CTO who had a PhD. Just off the top of my head, a more recent case. And what I helped him realize, I think he realized that in the end, was that his job is not to be the alpha geek in the room. His job is to enable the geeks in the room, ideally not having any alpha ones, because that's not helpful for the team, but to enable the alpha geeks to be fantastic and deliver what you need them to deliver on that vision, and empower them rather than compete with them.
And it's such a hard transition to make, to go from the person that knows the answers to the person that's enabling and encouraging other people to know the answers. Like psychologically, a lot of us, myself included, when I was making this transition, pinned so much on that skill set and on the knowledge or the intelligence or the capability, or however we think about it. And then we get promoted into those leadership positions, and all of a sudden that's not what's valued anymore. And it's not only not valued, it's actually it's a hindrance when you behave that way. And so just making that shift can be so difficult.
Excellent question, Mark. Thanks for that.
I might just examine one other wrinkle of Mark's question, which is, so in my experience talking with boards, and in the context where they're not in a decision-making capacity, often they're in asking guiding questions. Sometimes not too much unlike a coach. And so some of the other metrics that they are interested in, we talked about risk earlier, and so the state of your risk profile for like cyber and for data privacy and other areas is also a common set of updated measures that they're interested in, normally so they can ask some probing questions just to validate that you're considering all the different angles on it, and your boards are often composed with people with the sort of experience such that experience that you may not have elsewhere in the company. So I hope we've thoroughly answered your question, Mark.
There's another comment from Mark, which I'm just putting up now.
All right.
Sorry, which is that actually there's a cultural influence as well, right? And the aspects of the ways that different cultures respond to power or set expectations of themselves or set expectations of others really can shift how easy it is to have those conversations.
I think Mark's comment is spot on, that obviously even if you are against the tide, if they've had a CTO for 5 years or 3 years or whatever, that encouraged this perception of perfection and sent mistakes underground rather than bringing them up early, I can see how it takes a while. It takes years to build culture. And even as a leader, you're the one that drives that culture, but it also takes years to build it, especially if they have a completely different culture when you join. And initially, they will be confused about your new way of working, as you were.
I think that leads us to the next question, which is, if CTO wants to make the change and start kind of shifting viewpoints and having more success working to get more investment, where can they start?
Again, could we discuss some context for this? This is how my mind works, because if a CTO wants to make some change, to me, starting is always about the business case. What is, if I had to answer it in a very general way, the start is always, well, what's the business case for doing this? Why should we bother doing it? How is he making money? How is it, and not just making money, like how is it going to help the company achieve its goals or the investors' goals? If they're heavily on the board. There is something I will say, actually. I have noticed a pattern that if you have many board members who are from a banking finance background, especially if your company is not fintech. But even if, in fintech, obviously, you're going to have a lot of that. They are much harder to help understand what you're talking about, and they understand numbers and profit much better than anything else you'll ever explain. And I've seen that pattern now for at least 10 years.
Okay. Actually, I want to ask the question I had. Sorry, Daniel. I'll step back so you can ask your question or step in. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. This internet delay has caught back up with me. I was going to say I've lost my train of thought due to the delay.
Oh no!
It's catchy. I lost mine earlier. It's definitely catchy. Yeah, I mean, can I? Because one of the points I think you're trying to make is there a viewpoint or perspective that a CTO can take on that will help them understand what their board exec is looking for. I mean, I think to me that comes back to how do you figure out what your board is looking for? Well, first of all, build a relationship with them from day one. You win the board one person at a time. Shock and awe is not a good strategy for the board. If you propose something they've never heard about before, I guarantee they will always say no. In the movies, when someone presents to the board and they all go, wow, blah, 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 blah. Rubbish. That doesn't happen in reality. It's just all these boards, throwing their papers out going, oh my God, Chris, the CTO, you are brilliant. Why didn't we think of this? Yeah, no, that doesn't work in reality. That is just Hollywood drama. So build a relationship with the board members from day one. Ask them for coffees, ask them for catch-ups, ask them for chats. It's go there for dinner, all the rest of it. It's really, really helpful to understand because you hear the truth when you're in an outside environment. Secondly, if they, for example, every time you present or other exec members present something, look at the questions they ask. Frankly, write the questions down because in the moment you're going to be in such a fight, flight, or freeze mode, you probably won't be able to process those questions, but literally type them up on your laptop ASAP and then look back a week later at those questions and go, oh, what? The questions were all about risk, or the questions were all about profit, or the questions were all about sales. What's the hot topic they're worried about this quarter or this year? And then the sort of things that you need to be talking about. But also, look at the sort of things they push for. What sort of things do the board suggest to the exec all the time? That's another angle.
Okay.
Yeah, the questions are such a good indicator.
Yeah, they really are. And is there likely to be a difference between how the sorts of questions the exec want to ask and the sorts of questions the board and non-execs want to ask?
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry.
So coming back to the question we mentioned at the beginning, like, is there a difference between how you would talk to the board as opposed to how you would talk to your fellow execs?
Yes. So, for example, if you're making a proposal to the board, you have to give them a helicopter view of timelines, deliverables, profit, or risk. Those are the 4 key words I'd say. If you are talking to your peers, which they should be your peers, I know most of the time they aren't, but the other C-suite CXOs, CMO, CFO, CPO, CTO, etc., then you have to talk in more detail about the impact on their departments or the kind of what you'll need from them to make this a success. Now, as I said before, they should already kind of know this, but it's good to kind of reiterate it in front of the whole company, as it were, so then it's all united and it's all brought together. And you can never have too many times the same conversation with your peers, to be honest, because you often slip and forget what you told one person or the other. So it's always best to cover all bases. But talking to your peers is is also about the impact on them of what you're planning to do, rather than just the highlight of this is what we're going to do. And then other people are going, a real situation, one CTO said to me, we were in the C-suite, in the EMT meeting, executive management team meeting, and the CPO said that they're going to achieve this in the next quarter. And I was thinking, no, that's not what we have on engineering, and they can't do that without engineering. That shows misalignment in the board straight away.
Yeah. And so the comment about securing allies on the board, you also want to secure them in the executive, but possibly secure them first so that when you show up and talk to the board, they're getting the same message from everybody.
That's it. I mean, that's the other thing, that you lose hugely credibility when you're not aligned as a C-suite. The investors will start wondering what on earth is going on. And just so you're aware, the investors don't often ask the CTO to present. If they ask the CTO to present, it means that they're looking for reassurance. They're really looking for some more detailed reassurance. It means that there's usually an issue. So that's more than ever, you need to prepare with someone who's experienced. I would never go to my first board meeting when I've been asked to present as a first-time CTO without speaking to an advisor first. I just wouldn't.
I imagine along with everything else, kind of pitching things correctly, it would also kind of help soothe the jitters you get for the first time, the adrenaline rush, some of the other issues that you don't actually want to have show up the first time you're talking to the board.
Are there any other practical tips or advice of like what's something a CTO could start doing tomorrow?
About,
even if it's like a behavioral or habitual aspect. What is like one thing that they could be, that might get them in better shape for dealing with their executive peers and or the board?
From my perspective, I would first and foremost try to understand the CFO and all the numbers around my work, as you were. And then from that, start talking to the other departments, the CPO, The reason I'm saying that, and build a relationship with all of your peers. The amount of times I've seen a massive rift between the CTO and the rest of the C people, it's frightening. And I would say that's because if you speak to the CFO first, you might find you have some answers for product about what costs product has as well, and help them with some ideas and things. Mm-hmm. And you come across as quite insightful, because nobody asks for those numbers. And, like very rarely people actually go to a CFO mm-hmm. and go, can you help me understand my cost to this company? Because it's scary. It's scary to say, how much am I costing this company?
Yeah. And you, by being across those, you can be proactive rather than having to reactively deal with it when it becomes an issue. So in my experience, that was another Absolutely. Very handy aspect.
I mean, I would say reactivity, frankly, again, erodes trust that you're handling it. You're on the ball.
So even if you're struggling, asking for help shows more active involvement than waiting for someone to come to you and tell you have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're coming to the last 5 minutes of the show. So I thought we might take an effort to do a quick recap. So we talked about the challenge of CTOs being persuasive when they need budget or other types of investment from their, either support from their executive peers or from the board. Part of that challenge stems, sometimes from the career path that they've gone through. Maybe not having the training or the context that they would need to operate on successfully. And we talked about in terms of the approach, building relationships and communication was a key theme that we've covered today. And so we had some practical steps, and I've added a step 1 to the front of them. And my step 1 that I'm going to add to the front is make time for it. So one of the things that's implied by all the things that we've suggested here is that you actually, you could be busy firefighting, but if you're not making time to actually do things differently or build relationships, then you're going to be missing a trick. Step 2 was build a relationship. Step 3 was look at the questions that your peers and the board is asking, and Adelina suggested write them down, consider them again later at a point, a week or 2 later, and really consider why are these questions coming up and what are they really wanting to know. And then step 4 was be aligned, and so that's doubling down on that relationship piece, like really know what your peers are looking to achieve and what how you're going to work together. And she also said repetition is good, and so I'll say it again, repetition is good. Anything else? What did I miss in the recap?
Well, we did talk about getting help, whether that's from a board member that you can talk to, or other members of the executive that you can work with and ask questions of, or external help to the organization. Getting help is one of the signs of strength, that you actually understand your limitations and where you need to grow. And so actually talking about getting help with the other executives and with the board instills confidence rather than undermines it, which I think is what we talked about a lot of CTOs fearing, that admitting weakness of any kind is akin to vulnerability and incompetence, and therefore is going to get you in trouble. But actually it's a sign of strength to be able to own that you need help.
Anything else we missed, Adelina?
I was just going to add that, assessing having this kind of self-awareness to realize, instead of blaming the engineers that they're not bringing issues early, and you notice yourself getting anxious and angry in the meeting when they ask you questions. But even if you're in the moment, even if you went as far as shouting, I think we said that it's literally kind of showing that self-awareness and vulnerability and saying, well, actually, I've just realized these questions are making me uncomfortable, and it's my fault they're making me uncomfortable, not your fault. Spelling things like that is absolute magic. So yeah, that's another point I think that we discussed.
Yeah, 100%. Signposting where you are, what's your emotional state, and if you need to, coming back at a different time. Okay, well, that's about all we have time for. So I will throw to Noah. Noah, where can we find you? And do you have anything to share?
So there's one of the things that we didn't talk explicitly about, but which comes up a lot, is that a lot of CTOs struggle to find the people they can get feedback from, because they still think of themselves as technical, and they worry that, who can I talk to ask for help? And so one of the things that I work with them a lot is helping them understand how to ask for feedback and who to ask for feedback and how to frame the questions so they can get what they need. And right now I'm giving away an ebook, a free ebook about it, which you can find at my website, noahcantor.com/ebook. So if that's ever been something you struggled with, and I know I have, please download it, read it, and let me know, how it sits with you.
Very good. And Adelina, where can we find you?
I'm often on LinkedIn. And thank you very much. And also my website, geekwhisperer.co.uk, just tells you the sort of things that we do, because I have other associates that I also commission for certain projects. The video that I mentioned earlier about how to get the board to say yes to engineering spend is on Gumroad, but it's also on the featured section of LinkedIn my LinkedIn profile. I also have how to get a CTO role in a difficult job market 1 hour workshop coming up, which will only be like £10. I just want to make sure people are serious about attending. It's not something that I'm making money out of. I just want to share some tips and some common mistakes I've seen CTOs make in trying to find work. And I can tell you the CTOs that do these things, they always have work. They have 2 or 3 offers on the go, even in this difficult market. And the other thing was how to become a successful CTO in 1 year. I have a course coming up about this later in a few weeks. And if you want to find out about both of these things, join the waiting list, or the interest list, which is going to be put in the show notes, and I can share it in a comment as well later.
Cool. Daniel, where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me still at my interestingly named Substack. So, I mean, if you go there, you'll see it's under the Great CTO brand, but that Wayuta is my online nickname that you can find me anywhere with. I've been doing 10 free sessions that I donated to CTOs over the last few weeks, and so really being enjoying meeting new CTOs and helping them with their situations. And I had a lot of interest out of Southeast Asia, so I'm looking to run a group coaching cohort in Southeast Asia for people in Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong, and anywhere else in the region. So if you're interested in that, DM me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we can find a time that suits a group of people. And with that, I'll leave you with this thought. So an apt metaphor for adaptation. I always think about a rocket traveling to the moon, and the reason why I find that interesting is you're leaving a moving body, you're traveling in a moving body, and you're trying to reach a moving body. And I think that just has a lot of parallels or analogy to working. And so the rockets, they use instrumentation to determine where they are and the progress that they're making, and makes adjustments to reach its target. So with that, I will leave you. And thanks again for joining us on CTO Life Line. We'll see you next time on August 29th. Is that right, Noah?
August
with Tiani Jones.
August 29th, New Zealand. August 28th in the US with Tiani Jones. Yes.
It's like you have a time machine.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adelina and everybody else.
Thank you. Excellent questions.
Thank you.